This is Talking Foreign Policy, a critical look at Canada's role abroad, and I am Eve Engler. Recently, university administrations across the country have dispatched private security, police, gone to court to dismantle student encampments against Israel's genocide in Gaza. Students often there for as long as 3 months, and yet with the exception of University of Windsor, for the most part, university administrations have refused to negotiate seriously with students' demands. Even though we know these generally liberal institutions have conceded on other divestments, most recently around fossil fuels, a number of the universities that have refused to negotiate with student encampments on Palestine have actually quite recently often been willing to divest on fossil fuels. To make sense of this, the intransigence of university administrations, and also maybe to challenge some of this notion of Canadian universities as being hotbeds of pro-Palestinian sentiment. Today we author of the new book, Analyzing the Israel Effect in Canada, a Critical AutoEthnography, Peter Eglin. First of all, thanks for coming on Talking Foreign Policy. And I guess my first question is, how do you see the encampments and how does it fit into your experience as a professor for 30 years at Wilfrid Laurier University? And the book.
Yeah, well, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. In fact, I was. I thought maybe there had been a bit of a sea change in opinion in this country over the last few years, and it doesn't seem to be there at all. I was a Prophet Laurier for 40 years, but I sort of really got involved with this issue starting in 1990. I started a human rights course at Laurier, and this was one of the cases that I took up. And I also I did some research on media treatment, and specifically the Global Mail, on the first Intifada from 1987 to 93. And then later on, kind of got active on campus in protesting various things. So what my experience, and that of many others who try and do this sort of thing, trying to draw attention to Israel's crimes against the Palestinians, my experience was that it's a considerable slog and you get lots of opposition to it. And the book is a kind of an atrocity tale, if you like, about that experience of being slandered in various ways. Although I didn't suffer any particular, important to me, get fired and certainly anybody who doesn't have tenure as a university professor would be very reluctant to undertake any kind of criticism of Israel, because the lobby will just launch a fierce attack at you and the administrations cave. In my case, it's kind of a mixed bag. Largely very reluctant to defend one's academic freedom, but they did on occasions against the lobby's forces. So when the encampments came, I thought, given the enormity of Israel's crimes this time around in Gaza since October, so visible, so transparent, you watch it on TV, how could you possibly defend any of that? How could you, as an intellectual institution, a university, a newspaper, and any medium of news, how could you not absolutely go on the offensive in the name of truth and justice, to oppose this with everything you've got, and therefore to support any movement by, in this case, students, you got to ask yourself, why is it the students lead these encampments? Why aren't they populated with faculty? I mean, why are the faculty carrying on as normal when they can see what is actually a huge atrocity that's being committed? I mean, it's unspeakably brutal, and it's out of this world what Israel is doing to Gaza. I don't know how you can carry on life as normal, particularly as an academic, where your commitment is to speaking the truth. And one of the great features of this whole conflict is the enormous lying that goes on. It's colossal. This is what first got me agitated in early 1989, 1990, is the transparent lying. The reverse of the truth, over and over and over again. And as an intellectual institution, where my university's motto is, I was taught when I did Latin at school to pronounce V's as W's. So it's veritas omnia vincit, or veritas omnia vincit, which means truth conquers all. I'm a kind of a clown who takes those things seriously, the truth conquers all. Well, there couldn't be a more blatant lying than what goes on, not just in terms of the Hasbara or propaganda that comes out of Israel's government, but how it's conveyed and retold by Canadian government, public relations for the Canadian business, university administrations, and of course the principal news media. I mean the National Post is off the charts, but say the Globe and Mail, which Canada's national newspaper with some claim to a kind of authoritative voice, just atrocious, absolutely appalling. And one of the chapters in the book is with them. I do how the Globe treats the occupation and oppression of the Palestinians. I forget what your original question was.
Well,
The
so
encampments.
but the camping, but I actually really want to get into the broader question of kind of what's in the book, which is this question of responsibility of intellectuals in the academic world, and your experience. I know in 2009, when Israel was engaging one of its previous slaughter campaigns against Gaza, not as extreme as the recent one, but nonetheless quite horrifying. You were involved in protesting on campus. I think you were one of the few, you maybe even a sole academic doing it, and there was a pushback. You got, B'nai B'rith put out a statement condemning you. Other of the anti-Palestinian lobby groups came at you. And there's many examples, as you kind of alluded to, there's many examples of academics who have been, fired or didn't get tenure or different kind of ways. You didn't experience that. You were already a tenured prof, so you had a certain degree of protection from that. But can you, just a little bit about sort of the question of the responsibility of intellectuals and the campaigning, your personal, the attacks against you, but more about the responsibility of intellectuals in the context of such a power imbalance and injustice.
Well, I've been very influenced by Noam Chomsky, as I'm sure you have too, and he makes it very plain. It's the responsibility of the intellectual to speak the truth and to expose lies. That's been repeated many times in activist circles, but it's pretty nicely said there. The intellectuals, at somewhat greater length, the intellectual responsibility of the writer or any decent person is to tell the truth. It is a moral imperative to find out and tell the truth as best one can about things that matter to the right audience. So in December the 27th, 2008, Israel attacked Gaza in Operation Cast Lead, as it was called, and it went on for about to January 8th, I think. And I was to go on a sabbatical leave. Had a sabbatical leave for 6 months starting in January of 2009. So I was at home, and there was a news report about a week into it about a school that had that 40 or 40 Palestinians had been sheltering in the school because their refugee camp was under attack. They sheltered in the UN school. They were killed by an Israeli attack. And I was just I was kind of horrified by that. And I got on my bike and went up to campus and got hold of a mic and a speaker and just started talking in the concourse. The concourse is an area of the university, a kind of an internal square where there's some space and events are held there. Just it was in the early afternoon and just spoke to anybody who cared to listen. And the student newspaper showed up, and then at the end of it, I spoke for about an hour and a half, and I was kind of putting it to the students, what are you going to do about this? And you're just going to sit around while this goes on. And then at the end of it, I said, okay, at the end of the day, I'm going to come back tomorrow and do the same thing. Well, that evening, I got email from the manager of student services who managed the concourse space, which you had to book in order to use, from the dean of students and from the dean of arts. So my immediate boss, I suppose, I was in sociology. All asking me to kind of desist or to come and talk about it, maybe arrange something, a debate or something. And I told them that they kind of missed my point. I was looking to excite a response from the university as an intellectual institution to the attack on the school and also the attack on the Islamic University of Gaza, which had also happened in the first week or two of the assault. As one university to another, we should surely come out and speak up in its defense. So I went back on the following day and did the same thing again. This time, some other students and Jewish students showed up from the Jewish Students Association, which is the predecessor of Hillel. And I gave them the mic. I said, you can speak. So we went back and forth. Later, I learned that the JSA had gone to the administration the very first day, the Tuesday that I first spoke, to try and get them to stop me on the grounds that I was creating a kind of an unfriendly environment in the university for Jewish students. And they went again after the Wednesday, the second day, and they went again the following Thursday. And then I learned that the administration thought actually I was okay. As long as I was opening the mic and other people would speak, they were happy for it to go on. But they did, when the fourth rally, if you can call it, occurred, when there was quite a lot of people came, they asked the hate crimes unit of the local regional police to be present. B'nai B'rith showed up, JSA showed up in numbers with banners, and it got a little testy, but went off okay. And then the Jewish campus life, Southern Ontario person, brought a complaint against me to the harassment coordinator at the university, and I was eventually called to answer that and to apologize to a student that I'd told to shut up because I was being harangued when I was trying to speak, and I said, "Oh, shut up." Because I shouldn't, I apologize for that, but not for what else I'd be done. And then it got in the local newspaper. B'nai B'rith put out a press release. I got called by Jewish student, the Jewish news. What? Yeah.
Canadian Jewish News.
Canadian Jewish News covered it, and I got an email from a certain Ohad Fass from a radio station in Israel, with some leading questions that I declined to respond to. I thought I'm just going to get into trouble if they wanted to interview me about it. So the usual kind of escalating kind of thing happens. Now, it wasn't particularly, onerous in my case. In the end, the harassment coordinator put out a statement that partly defended me, and I apologized to the one student. That was in 2009. In 2001, I had been asked by the webmaster for the university's website. They developed a new thing called commentary, where faculty were invited to write short things that could show off the university to good effect. And my nemesis at Laurier was a political science professor called Barry Kay, who died in 2019. But he's very much a pro-Israel supporter, and he had been asked by the webmaster to do a commentary on Israel. And some students on campus got very agitated by what he wrote, anti-Palestinian, they call it. So I was invited to do a counter kind of thing, which I did. It came out on September the 10th, 2001. And you know what happened on the morning of September the 11th, 2001? 9/11 happened. The noon of that day, the president ordered my piece to be taken down on the grounds that it was a threat to public safety. And so it was taken down. But Barry Kay's was left up. There you go. I eventually made an academic freedom case through my union, and it was put back up later in the month for the prescribed 5 days, and then consigned to oblivion. So there's another kind of example of how things happen. I don't know if you're going to ask me, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The particular value of the book is that it gives you these accounts in detail. You can see in detail how things work institutionally, the different actors that are involved. And I think the value of it is in the detail. Remind me again what I'm supposed to be talking about.
Agreed. Yeah, no, so, well, shifting onto the media front, which is also part of your book. I write an intro, and in the intro I mention a couple anecdotes, personal ones around the Globe and Mail, because that's one of your focuses in the book. I tell the story that Aaron Mate, who I was in the student union with at Concordia University back 20 some odd years ago, his father, Gabor Mate, who's well known in the kind of health doctor, and how Aaron told me a story about how his dad, the Globe and Mail's op-ed editor, was always happy to take commentaries from his dad, except when it came to Israel, because Gabor is, of course, critical of Israel. And another anecdote that I came across a number of years later in a car ride with Rick Salutin, who was a longtime sort of token leftist columnist at the Globe. I think now he's at the Toronto Star, but for about 20-25 years he had a weekly column at the Globe. And he basically made the same point, where that was the one issue, the principal issue, where he would get sort of a talking to from the op-ed editor. Please, sort of, oh, that just causes us trouble. Please don't, and honestly, Rick Salutin's not that hard, in my opinion, not that hard line on the question of Palestine, but he's nonetheless for dominant media, he's a critic of Israel. But so yes, you talk about your personal experience with the local newspaper, the Waterloo Kitchener Record, and also with the Globe and Mail. Can you just sort of describe a little bit about your interaction with these media outlets on the question of Palestinian rights?
Yes. The first chapter of the book, after the introduction, which goes on about the responsibility of intellectuals, the first chapter is a report of some research I did in the early 90s on the way that the Globe reported the First Intifada. So it was astonishing, really, the degree of attention that the Globe and Mail paid to that. It was daily, every day there was a report of what was going on. And many of those reports were accompanied by photographs. I looked at about 3 years of coverage from 1989 through 1990, March of 1992. I couldn't do the whole thing. It was just too much material, and I had other things I needed to do. But I covered about 3 years of the stuff, and I decided to focus on the way that the photographs that were accompanying stories, because I had a sense of kind of a real imbalance, and when I looked at it closely, and I collected every photograph that they published over those 3 years and 3 months, it was quite evident that the Intifada, there were Israeli deaths, Jewish Israelis died, some Jewish Israeli died, but many more, tens of more Palestinians were killed. But what the photographs were frequently of weeping Jewish Israelis, people in full-blown grief, whether soldiers or parents of persons who've been killed. And as they should be. I mean, you should see the grief of people when the family members have been killed. It's a natural thing. We should be exposed to that and feel sympathy and a kinship with those persons in their suffering. You get no such pictures for the Palestinian victims. The one photograph in those 3 years and 3 months that displayed a kind of depiction of some kind of grief was of a mystical pose by an old Arab woman with a traditional dress, with her hands sort of looking up to heaven, as it were. And that's it. I wrote this up, and I sent it to the Globe. What's his name? William, his name's gone on, was the editor at the time. Can't think of his name. The editor wrote me back a 3-line letter, which I put in the newspaper. I put in the newspaper. I put in the book. I've actually got it here. I can show. Yes. Yeah. I actually printed it. I don't know if you can see it. There's the letter itself. You write from William Thorsell is his name. You write from an admittedly impassioned position and confine your analysis of a newspaper's coverage of a complex event to its selection of wire photos. The outcome is, with respect, trivial. I do hope you'll find the time to read the newspaper. So that was the way the Globe. So I've never had anything in the Globe and Mail published, letter or op-ed or anything in 30 years. They don't even reply. And then in 2006, I submitted an op-ed to my local newspaper, the Waterloo Region Record. It goes under different names at different times. Kitchener Waterloo Record, and one time it's simply the Record. It was in the summer of 2006. There had been a war between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Israel had not come out well on it. I wrote a piece kind of condemning the killing that had gone on, that they'd carried out, and put it in the kind of context of the Israeli-Palestinian thing. And the editor at the time, the editorial page editor, a guy called John Rowe, he gave me the time of day. You know, I could talk to him, and he published it. And the title of it was "Israel's Mistakes Are Too Easily Forgiven and Forgotten," I think. Well, it got published. That was the first thing. That at least happened. Within 5 days of that appearing, 3 other op-eds appeared in the newspaper, defending Israel, extolling Israel for what it had done in Palestine, and claiming that the world was awash in anti-Semitism. You know, the very day that my piece came out, I got 5 phone calls on my home phone, on my office phone. Now, funnily enough, the phone calls were actually laudatory. I got phone calls from people who won't speak up publicly, but said, that's what I wanted. I always wanted somebody to say that. And so I thought, pat yourself on the back. But the letters to the editor were 2-1 against. And of course, what they did, they don't take up your case. What they do is you go after your credentials. So did Laurier employ this guy as a sociologist? How can that, like that be allowed to teach students, et cetera, et cetera, and a torrent of flack, I think I call it. The worst of it was in that that Operation Cast Lead was the Globe ran the assault took just over a bit over 3 weeks. In that from December 27th to January the 16th, they ended on the 18th, but the 16th was last. They printed 4 editorials on the Intifada. Extraordinary. 4 editorials on it within a 3-week period. And the last one, called Hard on Hamas, I think it was called.
These are editorials like a editorial board.
The editorial board of the Globe, yeah, the newspaper's position. And one of the ones concerned the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council had denounced the attack by Israel, and Canada opposed the council. The vote was 33-1. Canada thought it was just fine what they did, and the Globe and Mail defended Canada in that editorial. But the one that I particularly incensed me with is Hard on Hamas, and it was like there's one standard trope of Israeli propaganda repeated by the Globe and Mail and others is that there's a war between Israel and Hamas. Well, in some sense that's true, but when you've got one side that has like handheld guns and those silly rockets, and the other has a whole air force and a navy and an army and tanks and artillery and is blasting the hell out of you. You can't call it well, Rick Salutin, is one of the, he also made that point. It's not a war. It's a war on somebody, yes, on a group of people, on a bunch of civilians. And Israel has long admitted that it will kill civilians at will. Partly in the same way, the justification is, every Arab that opposes Israel is a terrorist, and so children are terrorists in waiting, and so it's perfectly fine to kill them. And the idea is, there's a political motive, and that is you've got to persuade the population to get rid of these people who are leading you. Yeah. So Palestinians and their leaders. Really nasty stuff. So one of the chapters in the book is about that coverage by the Globe and Mail with particular focus, and I take apart that editorial in detail and contrast it with something that a talk that Chomsky gave on January the 18th, the day that the hostilities came to an end, where he said that a whole bunch of things, that the Israeli policy is to appear to go mad. So you kill at will. Civilians are perfectly fine. The whole thing had been planned months before, and so on and so on. So it's not simply a response to the fact that there was rocket attacks that day. No. They're lined up. They're waiting, and they go when they wish. So I think it's important to appreciate that the genocidal assault that's going on now in 2024, 2023, a series of massacres of contemporary massacres that began with Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, and then 2012, 2014, Operation Protective Edge, the response to the Great March of Return in 2018-19, the May 2021. I forget the names of them. They're in the book, but and then this operation right now. Yeah. So there's a chapter of the book is taken up with the photographic coverage by the Globe, another one on the way they covered Operation Cast Lead, and one is the way the Record covered the Lebanon War in 2006. And there's a couple of other chapters there. So let me see. Can I forget what I've written? Oh yeah, I submitted. Yes, you remember when Donald Trump in 2018 recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to. There was a big outcry against that. Well, the Israeli government propaganda machine went into operation, and they put out through their acolytes and the whole structure of their propaganda apparatus, with people located in different countries around the world are ready to go at a moment's notice. I guess they get the message, they get the points to use, and then they send in their stuff. Two editorials, op-eds appeared in the Record in late 2018, early 2019, supporting Trump and defending Israel again. And I wrote something opposing. I was so appalled by the lying that went on in these two things. One by my nemesis, Dr. Barry Kay, another by a prophet, McMaster. So I laid out a critique of these things. Well, the Record wouldn't publish it. So I pressed them. No, we're not going to do it. And so I went to the National News Media Council, which is a regulatory body that regulates the news media in Canada. And I complained. I issued a complaint. And there was some back and forth. And in the end, the News Media Council told me that, well, it's the prerogative of a newspaper to, print what it wants. And there's nothing we can do. So there was one chapter that's taken up with that story, with all the emails and about that. So in that case, the sense of my piece.
So I mean, in sum, the book is helping us understand why Israel's been able to get away with this, genocidal, murderous onslaught in the last 9 or 10 months. Is that there are the academia, the media in countries like Canada, specifically US, elsewhere, but specifically this book deals with Canada, have been complicit and have enabled these horrible crimes that didn't just start 10 months ago. They've been really going on for a century. Obviously, there's various phases and there's various degrees of violence and dispossession taking place at various times, but that it's founded upon a whole kind of ideological milieu that's deeply complicit. Do you have any kind of final words about the book or the current situation?
The book covers the period from 1990 up until just after the beginning of the current genocidal assault. So my last word was an addendum to the preface on Remembrance Day, November the 11th. And at that point, they'd killed I don't know how many thousand, 11,000, I think, Palestinians by that time. So that's the period of coverage. There's a considerable literature on all this, as you point out, and the whole story goes back, as you say, 100 years. So I'm just taking a slice of it that's more contemporary. And what I struggle to convey is what I've read earlier in the interview is in the Holocaust, when the Nazis committed against the Jews in 1942-45 during the Second World War. Raoul Hilberg, who wrote pretty much the definitive account of that, also wrote a book about bystanders, those who witnessed, knew about it, and what did they do? So for me, that has been the presiding moral question. What those of us who witness to these kinds of events, what do we do? What is our responsibility? And it seemed to me, maybe the kind of upbringing I had, you can't just sit by and watch. When terrible things happen, you have to respond. So to come back to the theme, the people with the most responsibility are those who know what's going on, who can see it and understand it and have the means to formulate their thoughts and speak about it, write about it, protest about it. And the book is written in the end out of anger, rage, disgust, and almost disbelief at the lying, the assault on the truth. The idea that Israel has a right to defend itself being probably the primary plank of all this stuff. Of course, like any state has a right to defend itself, but that's not reportable. It's just part of the way the state system works. What Israel doesn't have is the right to attack, occupy, kill Palestinians. Under the Geneva Conventions, an occupying power that's just been the occupation having just been declared illegal by the International Court of Justice in the last week, the occupying power has a duty of care to the people that in the land that it occupies. Can you believe that? A duty of care. And the occupation should be ended in short order. That's the international law on this stuff. Well, it's been going on, but I don't know how many years. And it's the way that claim gets trotted out by American secretaries of state, presidents, Canadian prime ministers, spokespeople of all kinds, and others who know very well that this is a tissue of lies, stand by and let it be said. Well, that's intolerable to me. That's totally intolerable. And of course, you've written at length about why that's the case, why people don't, in your book on Canada and Israel, what stops people, and in your writings since then. It's been very, very helpful to expose those, going back to Christian Zionism and the particular place that Israel has in that brand of Christian eschatology. But the fear of being attacked, being called out, the fear of loss of donors, universities and other such institutions. It's pathetic. It's pathetic.
Thanks for that. So the book is Analyzing the Israel Effect in Canada, a Critical Autoethnography. And you can see it right there, from somebody who has been challenging the dominant narrative on this issue for 3 decades or so. People check it out. Thanks a lot for coming on, Peter.
Well, thank you for interviewing me, Eve. It's a great pleasure.